11. Clad in floor-length robes of white, their heads lifted high, the 6 golden-skinned young women sang his praises as he lounged on the down couch in his private chambers. Although none were related or even physically looked like one another, there was that in their fanatic expressions that somehow made them all seem identical. Their adoration for him was absolute, and each would have gladly accepted his advances. Not that such would have ever happened. That they were beautiful meant nothing to him, save that they were as the vast murals on the walls and the ceiling, or the intricate vases standing atop the crested marble stands. They were part of an overall design, one to help him relieve in some minute, very minute way the wondrous past that he had willingly left far behind. The prophet's luminous silver blue eyes gazed up at the masterfully painted images of ethereal winged figures fluttering through the sky. The artisan had been excellent by most standards, but he could have never have understood the true depth of what his patron desired. Still, the result of his long labor let the prophet imagine a little of what had been, and of what he had forsaken. He barely looked old enough to be called a man, though looks could be and were most definitely deceiving. His ivory skin was unmarred by even the least stubble, and his golden locks flowed well past his shoulders. The prophet was lithe and very fit, although not overly muscular, like the Inquisitor guards standing at attention outside his sanctum doors. He was, by the opinion of all who had seen him, simply perfect. He wore a look of innocent contemplation, yet tonight he was anything but serene. The impossible had come to pass, and he would not stand for it. He was too close to achieving his desires, too close to recreating the paradise he had lost. Near the area of his repose, 4 senior clerics clad in colored silver-white robes of their station knelt with heads down in prayer. Each man looked old enough to be his father or even grandfather, yet, just like the women, they treated him with the utmost veneration. The prophet suddenly found the many voices annoying to his ears. He raised one hand and the singing ceased. The praying stopped a moment later as the clerics became aware of the shifted mood. "I must compose myself before the next ceremony," the prophet declared, his own voice flowing like the music of a lyre. The singers filed dutifully out of the chamber, followed immediately by the clerics. The prophet waited for a moment, then reached out with his thoughts to make certain that his sanctum was sealed off from any who might wish to enter or attempt to hear within. Satisfied, he stared again at the fantastic images above, especially those of the magnificent flyers. A slight frown escaped him as he studied the details. Their wings were feathered like a bird's, the closest a mortal mind could come to the truth, and yet so very far from it. The continents were akin to his own, youthful and unmarred, but somehow, at the same time, ancient and knowing. He credited the artist for that touch, it perhaps being the most accurate portrayal, even if also wrong in so many ways. It had been years, nay, centuries, since he had revealed the truth, even to himself. Part of the reason had to do with his ongoing attempt to forget the past, to go on only forging a future that would be rid of any taint, any imperfection. But a greater part of it had to do with her and her terrible betrayal. He had never wanted to be reminded of what had been, or what might have been. It had taken him several lifetimes just to thrust her to the back of his thoughts. Then twice as many to bury her memory deep, to pretend on occasion that she never existed. Yet, now it seemed that all his efforts had gone for naught. So be it. He would unleash his righteous fury, and she and the others would learn what it was to dare plot against him. It would be reminded of just who and what he was, just before they were annihilated. The prophet raised his hands high, and both he and the chamber were enveloped in light. The paintings, the murals, everything on the walls faded away as if dew caught by a hot morning sun. Vanishing in their wake was literally all else. The intricate vases and the grand marble stands beneath them, the long tapering rugs, the garlands of fresh flowing flowers draping every wall, even the very couch upon which he had reclined, there remained nothing but the prophet. With but another thought, he next reshaped the chamber itself, from the very top of the ceiling to the floor beneath his feet. Every inch of the room took on a gleaming, mirror-like finish. The prophet stood reflected 100,000 times over, his glory undiminished no matter how great the distance the image was from the original. It was still not the true him. Unfamiliar emotion filled the prophet. Desire. The desire to gaze upon his long relinquished form. It suddenly became too much to bear. He stared at the foremost reflection, remembering, then, in the next instant, made his memory reality once again. The light he had earlier summoned focused upon him. It grew so bright that any normal man would have been immediately blinded, no matter how well he covered his eyes. Even then, the light continued to strengthen, first taking on an aspect akin to searing white flame, then becoming it in truth. But the flames did not harm the prophet, for they were a part of him as he was a part of them. He bathed in the white fire, let it melt away the false image of a youthful human that he had worn for far too long. And, in its place, there stood revealed a towering, hooded figure with wings of the same flame, a figure who had no face as mortals understood it, but rather a wonderful radiance beneath long flashes of silver light that, in their shaping, somewhat resembled a magnificent mane of hair shadowed by the hood. The other flames receded, allowing him to fully view his glorious image over and over. His long robe was pure sunlight, his great breastplate the shine of copper. Some would have recognized his as resembling a knight, but clearly of no mortal order. Even if the fiery wings that now stretched almost the full width of the chamber had not been a part of him, it would have been clear to any that his kind did not generally walk among something so lowly as humanity. The light shimmering from within the hood was the true him, a unique combination of pure energy and tonal resonance that marked him as one distinct being, even among his own illustrious kind. And slowly, he whispered the name that he had left behind on that fateful moment. The name which had been sung and praised by the highest of the high. The name she had oft murmured in love. Inarius. Inarius. Came a voice that was not a voice, but rather a sensation simultaneously experienced in mind, ear, and soul. I am Inarius again. And, in announcing it to himself, he felt a rush of jubilation. He was again Inarius, once of the Angiras Council, once a commander of the heavenly hosts, once a rebel against both the high heavens and the burning hells. The last remembrance doused much of his pleasure, much but not all. He had done what he had because both sides had become so mirrored in conflict that they could not see the ultimate futility of their struggle. Since the dawning of reality, when the two celestial realms had come into existence, and shortly thereafter, discord, their vast forces had fought one another for the control of all. Anything of value became the focus of attack and counterattack, generally to its destruction. Angels, as his kind would have been called by humans, and demons alike perished by the legions, all in the name of the Angiras Council. They who ruled the high heavens, and their eternal adversaries, the prime evils. But Inarius had grown sick of the endless battles, the plotting and counterplotting. Nothing was gained. Had he been in charge of the council, he would have done things differently. But even his brother in the sense of their resonance, their belongings held a distinct similarity compared with others, would not see reason. Even Tyrael, who was the essence of justice, could not and would not understand the truth. And so, it was that Inarius at last chose to abandon his part in the struggle. Yet he could not help feeling that there had to be others like him, even in the burning hells. Making contact with such, either those of his kind or especially the demons, proved a tricky situation. But Inarius had not been an advisor to the council for nothing. He understood the machinations not only there, but as they would be in the burning hells, and that allowed him to circumvent the watchdogs of both. He soon began to locate those others and gather them secretly to him. To his surprise, there were far more than he had ever dreamed. Far more who saw no sense in battling away at one another throughout eternity. Even more astonishing, there had been among the demons one who had thought like Inarius long before the angel himself had dared to do so. Her. The one who would awaken love in him, as he would do in turn. The one with whom he would help forge a world, a place known to his band of rebels as Sanctuary. The one who would turn his dream of paradise into a nightmare of blood. Inarius gazed at the mirrored image and saw her at his side again. She would not be wearing the form he recalled, not now. If she had truly found her way back, it would have been in a masked shape. Female, likely, but possibly male. She was cunning, beguiling, and a threat to all that was, by right, his. "You shall not take from me Sanctuary," Inarius reprimanded her memory. "I will not let you again destroy my dream. Sanctuary and all it contains will not be yours, even if I must destroy it myself, as it is my right." After all, it had been Inarius who had kept it all from collapsing after her heinous betrayal. It had been he who had countered the plots of the primevals in Lucian when they had discovered the realm, and he who continued to keep the Angiras Council ignorant of all. The fate of this world and all the brief lives on it were his, no one else's. The angel dismissed the vision of her with what in humans would have been bitterness, but what in Inarius was certainly no such base emotion. He was above all that, of course. He reacted only as events demanded, no more. In fact, Inarius had already set into motion steps against her return. She kept herself veiled well, but not well enough. She could not hide from him. He knew her even as her brother did not. Having divined that she had in fact returned to Sanctuary, Inarius had then calculated where she had to be located. That had turned out to be no difficult matter, not given her obvious plan, the continuation of her ancient obsession. "I will not brook the stirring of the Nephilim again," he thought, recalling what had happened last time. Such an abomination will not see fruition again. He suddenly swelled up in size. His wings filled the vast chamber, and the entire cathedral shook with his anger, though his followers would blame that on a mere tremor. You should not have dared return, not dared to influence that which should have been left buried so deep. Honorius stared at his reflection. Humanity did have one advantage, and he chose to use it again. But they thought the angel altered his appearance, recreating beneath the hood glimpses of a face akin to that of the Golden Trust prophet. The eyes were still pure energy, but the rest had some semblance of mortal life. More important, Honorius now had a mouth, and on that mouth he set an angry edge, a scowl. It better allowed him to display for his own satisfaction his fury. You should not have dared return, the angel repeated, savoring the harsh movements of the mouth and the coarse tones that accented his words better. The scowl deepened in a yet more satisfying manner as Honorius added, and you should not have dared try to cross me again, Lilith. They brought him gifts of flowers, food, and goods. Many of the gifts were simply discovered at the gates surrounding the estate of Master Ethan, left there by anonymous folk who had heard the tale from others. Partha has had its share of preachers and clerics talking of healing the body and soul, their host told Old-Dyson. Yet none of them were ever able to back their words with anything but emptiness. I only did what I wished that I could have done for my sister, the son of Demedes explained helplessly, not for the first time. The tale of the boy's healing had spread like wildfire throughout the town. Without exception, it was called a miracle, especially by the grateful mother. According to Ethan, she had gone from place to place, showing off what he had done for her only child and singing Old-Dyson's praises to the heavens. I know the woman. Bartha is her name. That child's her treasure, her only love. His father died just before he was born. A fall from a horse. The merchant and Headman smiled sadly. She always feared for the lad, though. I know she'll never let him see that. Tries to teach him to be strong. They have to stop believing all these things, Old-Dyson interrupted, staring out the window overlooking the gates. Even as he watched, a furtive figure in a cloak dropped a basket that appeared to contain loaves of bread and a flask of wine. The guards there pointedly looked the other way, not helping Old-Dyson's situation. From what he had seen, they were as awed by him as the rest of the citizenry. My people are a generous, appreciative lot. They seek to honor you for your good deed, nothing more. It would be best if we left before this gets any more out of hand, Old-Dyson, remarked Lila. We must be on our way to the city. The party had originally agreed to just stay overnight at Ethan's estate. However, a single night had turned into 2, then 3. Ethan made no attempt to ask them to depart, and Old-Dyson had quickly found that he had missed such simple comforts as clean beds and proper meals. He liked Partha, liked the people, especially the kindly merchant. He was only embarrassed by the excess of generosity, something he felt he did not deserve. "I can't," old Dyson finally said to her. "Not yet." With that warning, he started for the door. The others rose to their feet. Achilles was the first to ask, "Where are you going?" "Have to do what I must." "Wait here." Old Dyson gave them no chance to argue with him. He especially worried about what Lila would say if he hesitated. The plan was still to head on to Kejin. Just not yet. He all but flew down the stairs, but as he headed toward the doors, a slim figure caught up with him. Cedric, eyes wide, stepped up next to old Dyson and began keeping pace. "Are you finally going out? Are you? Will you do anything else like the last time?" he asked excitedly. The farmer grimaced. "I'm going out, but alone. Stay here, Ced, for your safety." "Safety? Safety? From what?" Instead of answering, old Dyson picked up his pace. He crossed the threshold just ahead of the boy. However, when Ethan's son attempted to follow, it was to have the door shut right in front of him, despite no one touching it. Outside, old Dyson breathed a short sigh of relief. He had hoped that the door would do as he wished, but actually, having it happen still astounded him. No one would be able to open it again until old Dyson was well into the town square. By then, it would be too late to stop him. Unfortunately, if he had hoped to make it there unnoticed, and his abilities failed him. Even before old Dyson stepped beyond the gates of the estate, people began to gather in his vicinity. It was as if they had been waiting for him to finally come out. Very likely the case, he mused. None of the faces he saw gave any indication of malice or fear, though. Something far different. Something he thought approached. Reverence? It was not the emotion he wanted of them. He had experienced it to a point with Serenthina and still felt uncomfortable. He was a simple man. He came to offer them something to put them on a level with himself and to free them from the control of the nobles and the mages. And most of all, the temple and the cathedral. Old Dyson had no desire to be worshipped. But first, he would have to show them that what he had done was not so much a miracle. Not if they could learn to do it for themselves. By the time he neared the town square, there followed in his wake a substantial throng. Old Dyson continued to sense nothing threatening in anyone around him. Perhaps he had overreacted in keeping his friends from coming with him immediately. But it was still possible that there would be one person around who might choose to see him as a thing of evil, a monster, as his own village had declared him. The center of Partha consisted of an open, stone-paved area where, in the morning, merchants and farmers with wagons sold various wares, especially food and meat. They ringed a wide, round fountain, in the middle of which stood a statue of a scholarly figure with a long beard and bearing twin scrolls under his arms. Master Ethan had called him Protheus, one of the founders of Partha, and the man who had preached kindness and understanding. Old Dyson thought Proteus' shadow a good one to have cast over him when he began his task. 4 leaping fish spouting water marked the outer edge of the fountain, and directly between 2 of these was a location that old Dyson chose. Protheus would be staring at the crowd from right behind him. The market had still been active, but a hush spread through the townsfolk the moment he stopped. Old Dyson suddenly felt nervous. His mouth went dry and he was tempted to thrust his head in the fountain, not only to try to quench his sudden thirst, but to hide from the very audience he had sought out. But then, old Dyson spotted a very familiar figure in the crowd. The woman Bartha. He had only to glance down to discover her son, who beamed at the man who had healed him as if old Dyson were his own father. That gave him the heart that he had momentarily been lacking. Unconsciously mimicking the statue's stance, old Dyson surveyed the crowd, then proclaimed, "What I've done is no miracle." But his words were met with disbelief by some, confusion by others. Bartha smiled as if he had told some gentle joke. She was absolutely certain of what she had witnessed, and her son was proof of that. However, old Dyson shook his head at her, then continued, "It's no miracle, because it lies within each of you to do as much, if not more." Now a murmur arose among the people, many of them clearly not believing this suggestion any more than the last. "Hear me! Hear me!" the son of Demet shouted at the top of his voice. "Hear me! Only a short while back, I was no different from the rest of you. I toiled in my farm, concerned only with my day's work. I thought of little else. The vicious bickering of the mage clans was not for me, save that I hoped it would not spill over into my village. Nor was I concerned with the empty words of missionaries from the temple and the cathedral, knowing how they had done nothing for my family, who first suffered long from plague, then withered slowly into death." Here he received sympathetic glances and nods of understanding from several in the crowd. Old Dyson spied at least a handful of people who wore a pock-marked faces of plague survivors. Partha might overall be very prosperous, but its individual citizens suffered their black days clearly. He shook his head. "I said that what I did was no miracle. But for me, there did come a miracle one day. An awakening of something within me. A force. A power. Call it what you like. Things began to happen around me. Some feared them, some did not." That was as far as he would go into the story of what had happened in Sarum. If the townsfolk discovered the truth later on, so be it. By then, either old Dyson would have convinced him or proven himself a madman after all. I was able to do things. Help others. He gestured at the boy, whose name he realized he still did not know. Urging the child to come to him, Bartha patted her son on the back, sending him off to old Dyson. The child ran up and hugged the tall figure tight. "I was able to help him," old Dyson added, letting everyone see the arm. The boy smiled at him. "And what I did, you can do too. Perhaps not immediately, but you will." Many shook their heads or frowned. It was one thing for them to believe that he could perform miracles, but still they could not conceive of such abilities in themselves. With a sigh, old Dyson considered. Perhaps he moved too swiftly, even for the understanding people of Partha. Perhaps he just had to show them. "Partha," the son of Demet called out. "Come up here too, please." Beaming, she rushed up. "Yes, Holy One?" Her use of such a title caused them to wince. He did not wish to be put in the same category as Malik and his ilk. Never that. "I'm just old Dyson, Bartha, a farmer by birth, like many you know." Her expression immediately told him that his words passed by unnoticed. With a sigh, he finished. "Just call me old Dyson, please." She nodded, which was all he could hope for at this juncture. "Stand beside me." When she had obeyed, he looked for the man whose face had been most ravaged by disease. "You there! Come to me!" There was a moment of hesitation. Then the sandy-haired figure stepped up before old Dyson. He held his cap in his hand, as if it were a form of security. "What's your name?" "Jonas, Holy One." Old Dyson tried not to react again. He would get them to stop, eventually. "May I touch your face?" Again there was a pause, but finally the man nodded. "Yes. Yes, Holy One." Old Dyson reached to Bartha, taking one of her soft hands in his own. She allowed him to guide it up to the ruined flesh, unfearful of touching it despite its grotesque appearance. That impressed him. It was one thing to see someone disfigured so. It was another to actually feel that scarred skin beneath one's fingertips. He had chosen the right person with which to start. As both his fingers and hers made contact with the man, old Dyson closed his eyes and tried to imagine the flesh whole. At the same time, he also reached out to Bartha, trying to see inside her and let her feel what he was doing. He felt her abruptly shiver, but she did not pull away. Grateful for that, old Dyson focused on the figure before him. The man was understandably anxious, perhaps most of all from being the center of attention. Old Dyson knew that he had to hurry, if only to prevent Jonas from growing faint of heart and retreating. Old Dyson tried to recall the emotions that had flowed through him when he had healed the boy's arm. It proved easier to bring them to the forefront than last time. Something that surprised him. The pain, the loss, coursed through him. He knew others who had suffered disfigurement as the man had. The pain, the loss, coursed through him. He knew others who had suffered disfigurement as this man had. People in his village, whom he could not help now. Perhaps if all went as hoped, old Dyson could someday return to Sarum and make amends. Then, as if such thoughts were the key, the force within suddenly poured out of him. He sensed Bartha's renewed astonishment, an astonishment mixed with immense pleasure. He also sensed the man feel the power flowing into him, and specifically his ravaged face. A gasp of wonder rose from those watching. Old Dyson dared to open his eyes. His fingertips had already given him some hint of the results, but seeing them still amazed old Dyson at least as much as it did the throngs. The damaged skin was pink and whole. In fact, there was no longer a blemish or mark anywhere on the man's countenance. "Another miracle!" Arthur breathed. The subject of old Dyson's experiment put his own hands to his face. Marveling at the feel of his skin, he turned toward his fellows, giving them a good view of the results. Before they could start praising him again, the son of Demedes loudly interjected. "Bartha, did you feel everything? Did you?" Her expression turning confused, she replied, "I felt you heal him." He cut her off. "What did you feel inside yourself? Do you sense it yet?" She touched over her heart. The crowd, including the healed man, looked at her. I feel... She smiled beatifically at old Dyson. "I feel as if I've just awakened, Holy Master Old Dyson. It's... I don't know how to describe it." Nodding, he looked to the others. "That's how it begins. The feeling will continue to grow. It may take time, but slowly, you'll come to be everything I am, and possibly more. Possibly much more." It was a weighty promise, and one that old Dyson in great part regretted the minute that he had uttered it. Yet, now it was too late to turn back. As he learned more about what he was able to do, he would try to teach the others, at least until someone else could do better. That meant Kejung would have to wait even longer than he had initially intended. Old Ison could not very well leave the people of. That meant that Kejun would have to wait even longer than he had initially intended. Old Ison could not very well leave the people of Partha until they understood better. Immediately, he thought of Lila. She would be upset at first, surely, but as in the past, she would come around. When the nobleman saw how the Parthans reacted, it would make absolute sense to stay as long as needed. At least, he hoped, that she would see it that way.
I shall of the Great One.